From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Starting with a correction from last week. I forget, was it Wednesday or Thursday? I used the term continuing resolution. I was on a... it was completely wrong, the way I used the term. And I want you to know that I caught it, and I know... Okay, so correction. I was just kind of on a roll. I was, speaking quickly. And I was talking about the vote to continue debate, or the vote to open up debate for the voting rights bill that was filibustered by Republicans. And so I had continuing in my head, just the way I just used it, to continue debate. It was actually to start debate, and I used the term continuing resolution, which is completely something else. Continuing resolution is all about funding the government before the deadline, so that they can keep the doors open and the lights on. That's a continuing resolution. All right, so there, correction taken care of. Well, speaking of last week, the week ended so crazy. We got to go back and catch up on some of those headlines from late last week. It was a wild, wild week. Of course, we had the Chauvin sentencing. As you've heard by now, 22 and a half years, which is about 12 years over kind of the recommended sentence, but there were extenuating circumstances that the judge took into effect, the particular cruelty of the whole thing. I guess the maximum was 40, and that's what the family wanted, of course. All of us, just kind of listening to the legal experts and the pundits, kind of figured, yeah, it's going to be in that range between 20 and 30. Probably best we can expect is 25. Turned out to be 22 and a half. So definitely, I mean, relative to other cops, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I heard no other cop has ever been sentenced to this long of a sentence. It's a record for a convicted cop. There aren't that many convicted cops in the first place, but those who were convicted never got even close. So in that sense, relatively speaking, it's a very long sentence. In the moral world, if the world was the way it ought to be, and especially looking at it through the eyes of George Floyd's family, yeah, you wanted 30 or 40 years. So, as with everything, kind of a mixed bag, more good news than bad news, a small amount of justice meted out, but nobody can be happy about any of this. It's all just tragic. And I guess in Minnesota, eligible for parole after 60% of your sentence served. So that would be approximately 15 years. So in 15 years, he'll be eligible for parole. And, who knows what it's all going to look like in 15 years. If the family comes to these parole hearings and if the family and their lawyers can convince the parole board that, no, this guy needs to stay where he is. Or maybe by that time it's out of the public eye, nobody's thinking about it. He's been on good behavior for 15 years and they let him go. So that seems like a damn shame, 15 years for murdering somebody. But, that's a long way off. We'll find out. And I have to say this out loud. I don't know if this is uncouth of me, but do you think Derek Chauvin is going to last in prison? You think he's going to live to walk out of that place? I don't know. I think a killer cop would not be a very popular guy in a prison population. And prisoners are murdered, I don't know. I was going to say all the time, but, it's not. It happens. Let's just put it that way. Prisoners die in prison at the hands of other prisoners. Sometimes at the hands of the guards. And I would think in this case the guards would be kind of on his side. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not going to speculate on that. But I think it's safe to say, yeah, Derek Chauvin is not going to be anybody's best friend among the prison population. I can't imagine that. Also, he'll be immediately, or already is, on suicide watch. And because they have to protect him from the other prisoners, that's a lot of time alone. That's not good for anybody's mental health. Yeah, I don't know. Again, this might be kind of crude of me. I don't think he's going to walk out of prison alive. I think he's going to be carried out at some point before his 15-year parole is up. But, we'll see. We'll see. So, as I said, we're going to catch up on a couple of big headlines from late last week. It was crazy. Here's another one. And this one did not get nearly enough attention. I think this should have been the story of the week. The screaming headlines, but I didn't see anybody report on this. I'm looking at commondreams.org, and it's the only place I saw it. Leaked IPCC draft climate report reads like a 4,000-page indictment of humanity's failure. This is a warning of existential risk, of survival, of collapse, said Extinction Rebellion. A French press agency reported last week. By the way, it's Andrea Germanos, the staff writer of Common Dreams I'm reading right now. On the contents of a leaked draft of a United Nations Intergovernmental Climate Panel report, which warned that devastating effects of a warming world are set to hit far sooner than previously thought, with impacts including an additional tens of millions of people facing hunger by 2050. You look at these goals, and that's all they are goals. All they are words at this point. Everybody promising, we're going to be net zero carbon by 2050 or by 2060, some nations are saying. This is not happening fast enough. In some cases, it's not happening at all. We were talking just the other day about how greenhouse gases and carbon especially are in the atmosphere on the rise, even after all these pledges that have been in place now for 5-6 more years. Quote, "This is a warning of existential risk, of survival, of collapse," said climate movement Extinction Rebellion in response to AFP's reporting on what the draft contained. The draft Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, document warns of sweeping impacts on weather events, food, ecosystems, and disease. Changes expected even if global temperature rise is kept under the Paris Climate Agreement's second threshold of 2 degrees Celsius. It also calls for systems-wide changes to avert a worst-case climate scenario. By far the most comprehensive catalog ever assembled of how climate change is upending our world, the report reads like a 4,000-page indictment of humanity's stewardship of the planet, reported AFP. That's the French press agency. If we don't spell out the fact that it's our civilization we've put on the chopping block ourselves in words that everyone can understand, emphasizing risks that matter to everyone on this planet, who will? This is our dilemma. It's my dilemma here on the log. I want to shout this from the rooftops. I want to yell and holler. And yet I know that the more I whine and complain and scold, that's the best way to ensure that listeners will just turn me off. Nobody wants to hear whining and complaining. Nobody wants to be scolded. So I don't know. You tell me. You tell me, how in the hell do we communicate this? So it's not the final draft. It hasn't been released. It's been leaked. Nobody quite knows how or where. Because it is a confidential working document, the IPCC said it would not comment on the draft. But I don't know how, I don't know how else you interpret this. There's no other way to interpret that kind of direct language. I don't care if it's not a final draft. It's still absolutely newsworthy, and thanks to whoever leaked it. And again, I don't know what it's going to take to get people to listen, because I don't see it. Do you see it? Do you see any progress? We're talking major national governments. We're talking international corporations. We're talking about the big players who have to make big changes. This is not turn your heat down 2 degrees. Try not to use your air conditioner so much. Recycle. My God. It's a joke. These are big decisions by big players about how the world operates. How people work, how people consume, how goods and services are produced, distributed. Everything from top to bottom about the world's MO has to change. Nobody seems to want to accept that. So I don't know what we do about it. Look at the Let's look at the infrastructure bill. That's also the big headlines from last week. Nothing, zero. They completely stripped out any climate-related initiatives from the so-called bipartisan bill. And by now, I'm sure you've heard the story. The this group that negotiated a so-called bipartisan bill is Republicans on one side, and the only Democrats in the room were the most conservative Democrats. I don't know how you call this bipartisan when it's a debate among conservatives. Conservative Democrats, conservative Republicans. I mean, come on. John Tester, Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, Mark Warner. These are the jokers who were out in the driveway of the White House standing with President Biden last week, all smiles, announcing we have a deal. It's a done deal. It's going to happen. And we have another like 20 plus Republicans all saying, yeah, sounds good to me. Yeah, of course they're happy with this. It's all fossil fuel money. It's money going for roads and bridges and airports. It's all fossil fuel money. It not only stripped out all efforts to alleviate the climate crisis, it actually adds to the problem. So yeah, corporate Democrats, corporate Republicans, of course they're happy with this so-called deal. And then right after they announced the deal, a couple hours later, Joe Biden comes out and actually gets a smile out of us progressives saying, this is a double deal here. I've got to have the Democrats' multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill on human infrastructure and Green New Deal stuff. Got to have that too. We'll do that without Republicans. We'll do that using reconciliation. And he said flat out, I will not sign the bipartisan deal without the reconciliation bill. He said, I have to have both of them. Okay, so the Republicans go insane. And then the next day, he completely reverses himself. The press used that term they love to use. Oh, he walked it back. No, he didn't walk it back. He completely contradicted himself. I never said I was going to veto it. You said you weren't going to sign it. Okay, so technically not signing and vetoing are two different things. But we all knew what you meant. And we were happy about it, us progressives, for about 5 minutes. And then you quote unquote walk it back. No, he completely reversed. He caved. And believe me, I understand why. I do have some understanding of politics and especially how these guys have to feel like they have to work. So, I mean, I get it. But, yeah, nothing but disappointing. And the bipartisan bill, I mean, sure. I want to fix roads and bridges. I don't want anybody to fall off a collapsing bridge. But the point is, as I say, it's all around fossil fuel. It's exactly the opposite of what we need. Emphasis has to be on fewer roads, fewer bridges, fewer airports, less flights, less miles on cars. We got to draw everything back. But that's antithetical to 99% of everybody in power, those in Congress, the White House, corporate CEOs. Nobody. I don't know of anybody in Congress, to tell you the truth. I mean, even AOC and Bernie talk about growth. Even the socialists talk about a growing economy. Me and my radical buddies online are the only ones talking about zero growth or negative growth, about drawing back. Because how else are we ever going to make any progress on the climate crisis? We have to draw back. The economy has to shrink. We have to do less, produce less, buy less. And this whole infrastructure thing is all about growing and producing and consuming. It's insane. Now, the Democrat standalone bill at least has the whole so-called human infrastructure thing, especially as it regards to the care economy. And people do need care. But again, it's all corporate-centered. It's growth-centered. We got to have somebody taking care of little Billy, little 3-year-old little Billy. We need daycare for him. And we need elder care for his grandpa so that the parents can go out and work 40 hours a week and continue to drive this damn economy, which moves and grows by leaps and bounds. The economy grew by over 6% last quarter. Over 6%. So the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill looks like maybe, I don't know. Today, it looks like it's going to happen. Who knows what we're going to look at tomorrow? The funding is awfully interesting because there basically is no funding for it. The Republicans insisted on no new taxes, so we can't tax the rich. We can't tax the billionaires. Not one damn penny is coming from a billionaire on that bipartisan bill. They're repurposing funds that have already been appropriated elsewhere. It's like Trump stealing money from the Pentagon to pay for his wall. The original infrastructure bill, as proposed by Biden several months ago, as you recall, was about $3 trillion. Well, they dickered him down to $1.2 trillion, but if you look at the numbers, less than half of that is new spending. More than half of the $1.2 trillion is being stolen from where? From COVID funds. Oh, okay, well, I guess anybody who suffered because of COVID, that's just all over and behind us now. So we'll just steal that money from funds already appropriated to COVID. And outside of that, there are these vague, weird little clauses about how, well, they're going to get the IRS to clamp down and do a better job collecting. What? That's like an old Republican canard from the 80s when they used to say, oh, well, we can fund everything just by reducing fraud and abuse. Remember that old line? Yeah, Republicans used to love that. And then even, the so-called New Democrats, the third way or the middle way or whatever they called them, the Clinton Democrats, they picked up on that. Oh, well, we'll just clean up fraud and abuse. And somehow there's going to be all this money that magically shows up. What a joke. They think anybody believes this? Come on. And then the scariest of all are all these public-private partnerships, which is basically just privatizing infrastructure, which is the very last thing we want to do. Yeah, let's privatize infrastructure. That makes a whole hell of a lot of sense. Back to Common Dreams. Author Jessica Corbett. Progressives alarmed by privatization dub infrastructure deal a disaster in the making. Communities across the country have been ripped off by public-private schemes that enrich corporations and Wall Street investors and leave the rest of us to pick up the tab. After President Joe Biden and U.S. lawmakers on Thursday announced a bipartisan deal on infrastructure that Democrats say they will only support alongside a reconciliation bill, progressives doubled down on concerns about the compromise proposal's financing plans. Privatization is nothing more than an outrageously expensive way to borrow funds with the ultimate bill paid back by households and local businesses in the form of higher rates. That's Mary Grant of Food and Water Watch. Rather than pushing for taxes targeting rich individuals and corporations, a White House fact sheet on the bipartisan package outlines various other potential financing sources, from unused unemployment insurance relief funds to reinstating Superfund fees for chemicals. The proposal that has progressives alarmed is relying on public-private partnerships, private activity bonds, direct pay bonds, and asset recycling for infrastructure investment. Asset recycling involves the sale or lease of public assets to the private sector so the government can put that money toward new investments. The policy was previously encouraged by former U.S. President Donald Trump, despite lessons from Australia about its pitfalls. I'm not sure what that refers to. I guess Australia tried it. Yeah, I'm not happy. I'm not happy about any of this. The only thing I'm happy about is, I don't think people should die because of bad infrastructure. I mean, my God, look at this horrible, horrible story from Surfside, Florida. And, there was a good piece in Slate late last week. The Miami building collapse is a warning. Susan Matthews, writer. And she's very quick to point out that, no, we really don't know the exact causes. It's kind of like a particular storm or hurricane. Nobody can say, yes, that particular storm was caused by climate change. But over time, when you see patterns of storms, then there builds a consensus. There can be no denying the climate crisis is creating havoc. Well, I think Susan Matthews does us a good service by pointing out that even if they were able to pinpoint the exact reason that this building collapsed, it still should serve as a warning, because this is what we have to expect along every coastline of every continent. Let me read in part what she has to say. I certainly don't have any special information that investigators on the ground in Surfside don't have about why the Champlain Towers South collapsed. But reading about how climate change might exacerbate some of the very factors we might otherwise chalk up to structural integrity made me think that in the same way extreme weather has caused us to rethink our ideas about 100-year floods, it may be time to rethink the timeliness for building re-inspections when those buildings sit on particularly climate-sensitive land. So, I think she makes an excellent point. Without speculating ahead of time on the exact cause, I think it's perfectly appropriate to take it as a warning regardless. We have scientific consensus that coastlines around the globe will change. They are changing. And our response, our seriousness is, I was going to say lacking, but it just appears to just not exist. Well, speaking of the Biden White House, he continues to sort of flummox many of us because almost every day there's something kind of wonderful that happens. And it's easy to get a little carried away. Well, look at that. Isn't that great? Well, the wonderful things that happened last week, I think top among them is the expanded child tax credit. Reading now from Vox. July 15, 2021 could wind up being one of the most important days in the history of American anti-poverty policy. On that day, most parents in the United States will begin receiving monthly checks of up to $300 per child, no strings attached. What's technically happening, the child tax credit, a policy that has existed in some form since 1997, has been expanded both in its size and in its reach. It's going from $2,000 per child per year to $3,000 for children ages 6 through 17 and $3,600 per year for children under 6. But calling this a tax credit expansion makes it seem less momentous than it is. It's really a one-year test of an idea known as child allowance, a policy that has been adopted in most rich countries besides the United States. So, yes, families are going to be getting monthly checks to help raise their children, something else the rest of the world has. It's a limited window. I think it's only for a year. It's part of the whole COVID relief thing. There are already calls to make this a permanent program. And if that can happen, I agree, as the writer puts it, could wind up being one of the most important initiatives in the history of American anti-poverty policy. So yeah, that's great. And then there are, by comparison, smaller stories, but still, you can't help but feel good about it. The whole Juneteenth recognition, which we talked about. Headline from Politico, Pride is back at the White House. Biden pushes for LGBTQ Civil Rights Act. President Joe Biden formally recognized Pride Month in a celebratory White House ceremony on Friday, calling on Congress to pass a sweeping civil rights proposal known as the Equality Act, which basically broadens the scope of the Civil Rights Act to include LGBTQ folks. So both in symbol and substance here, it's just really, really heartwarming to read some of these headlines. So as angry as I get, and I do, and as disappointed as I am, these feel good. And it's one thing to push for legislation or to back legislation or to favor legislation, and it's quite another to get it done. He's trying right now to prove he can do it with infrastructure, all of its flaws notwithstanding. But yeah, if they can get the Equality Act passed, the very fact that he's calling for it, the very fact that he's having ceremonies in the White House, I saw a picture of a hallway all lit up in rainbow colors. Yeah, I suppose if you're cynical, you can just laugh this off. But, the symbols are important too. You and I had a long discussion about this regarding Juneteenth. You don't mock or dismiss the symbols. No, they're not enough. Of course they're not enough. If anybody puts that forward, if anybody tries to make the argument, well, look, we lit up a White House hallway in rainbow colors. What else do you want? If anybody tried to make that argument, then we'd have some angry words about that. But nobody's doing that. You can have both, and the symbols are nice. They're positive. We're all adults here, right? We understand the difference between symbols and action. You don't have to put down the symbols while you advocate for the action. Bully for the symbols. And here, I'm rapidly running out of time. We'll have to use another day or two to catch up on some of these headlines. But the one I want to get in today, I want to at least acknowledge this. The headline is from the Bulwark, and the headline, "Bipartisan Biden continues to be better at politics than you." All right, okay, well, I took a look at this. A central theme of this article is he's not taking the bait. Republicans are tossing all this ridiculous culture war stuff at him. He's not taking the bait. He's rolling up his sleeves every day and he's getting to work. Now, I concede that. And he seems to be having some victories along the way. I've already noted my disappointment in a lot of the details. But given the condition of Congress, who am I to say I could do any better? I'd be more of a partisan. Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I don't think it's a great accomplishment, really, to bring a handful of corporate conservative Democrats together with a few corporate conservative Republicans and everybody join hands and say, look at this bipartisan deal we made that's so corporate friendly and doesn't tax anybody, especially the rich. And it's all based on fossil fuel consumption and production. Yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to be fair. But you know what? I don't think I can take that seriously. I mentioned the article just to be a little even-handed, but I don't see it. I don't see it. I mean, if we're speaking relatively, yeah, relative to his predecessor, he's better. In the realm of making Washington work and making people work together in that sort of old-fashioned way, yeah, I guess you have to concede that. But I can't get beyond the idea that even if he succeeds on this standard, what actual difference will it make for the climate, for people's lives, for income inequality? I mentioned the child tax credit. That's great. But still, it's all built around a growing economy. Every single working age adult has to be out working for the quote-unquote economy. God forbid you leave the official workforce to take care of your parents or take care of your kids. No, we can't have that. No, we have to substitute that with a so-called care economy. So now you're paying somebody close to minimum wage to change grandpa's diaper. And so whatever success Biden has, it's still within that paradigm, that structure, which is completely ass backwards. So when I look at the whole story, I still come back to the same place. My opinion is reinforced. We got to go full socialist. We got to go left and left and left again. Got a primary. You got to challenge every moderate, every conservative. You got a primary. You got to challenge Joe in 2024. This is not going to get it done. Even the greatest success, as defined by Joe, is going to get us nowhere. As I used to say, I haven't said this for a while, it might pump on the brakes. We were moving toward complete and total fascism, moving toward complete and total wealth inequality. We were just about to drive this thing off the cliff. The best I can say, the way he defines success, if he achieves that 100%, it only pumps the brakes. It doesn't change the direction we're going. Nope. We are still headed in the same direction of economic injustice, health inequities, and an inhabitable planet. So, yeah, challenge everybody. All right, half hour went awfully fast today. We will talk again tomorrow. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.